Welcome back, everybody, to another week of Sunday School here at the Lighthouse Church of the Nazarene in Moravia, Iowa, where we are going through the book of John. This week, we are going to be in John chapter 18. So, we have now finished with the Upper Room Discourse, which was from John 13 to John chapter 16. We also finished John chapter 17, which was the high priestly prayer of Jesus. So, we are now done with Jesus and his private ministry to his disciples. Now, what are we getting to? We're going to now witness the arrest, the trial, the crucifixion, and the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. So, we're about to get to all the action. It's about to get good. So, we're in John chapter 18. Let's get out our Bibles, and let's follow along. John chapter 18, verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, like I said, the upper room discourse, the high priestly prayer of Jesus, when Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron. Now, the brook Kidron, this was the valley between the city of Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. The word Kidron, it actually means blackness or murkiness, which is fitting because this small stream was actually the drainage line for the temple. All the blood from the Passover lambs would have been going through this brook Kidron right here. And we read about this brook Kidron 1,000 years earlier. It's in 2 Samuel, I believe, chapter 15, when David is fleeing from his son Absalom. When Absalom's trying to overthrow him, it tells us that David and his soldiers, they went out over the brook Kidron when they were trying to flee him. So we've read about this brook Kidron before. As I said, it was the valley between the city of Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. So when Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. Now, John tells us, hey, there was a garden there. But what does he not do? He doesn't tell us what the name of that garden was. But guess what? All three other Gospels tell us what it is, and it's the Garden of Gethsemane. And the word Gethsemane, it actually means olive press. So there had to be olive trees there. It was the Mount of Olives. The Garden of Gethsemane, we know that Jesus actually slept there a lot. And I actually get this from Luke chapter 21. Verse 37. I'll turn there real quick and listen to this. Luke 21:37. Luke tells us, let me see. In the daytime, Jesus was teaching in the temple, but at night he went out and stayed on the mountain called Olivet. So Jesus probably slept in this Garden of Gethsemane. We know that Jesus was there quite often. So when Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. Now, John actually leaves out a lot of the other details that we get from the other Gospels. And we'd have to ask, well, why does he do this? Well, probably because he assumes that we've already read the three other Gospels. Remember, John is writing this account 50 years after the other Gospel writers had written their account. What details does John leave out? John leaves out the agony of Jesus praying in the garden. Remember when Jesus was sitting there praying and it said that just drops of blood were coming off of him? When he took his 11 disciples to the garden and he told 8 of them to stay there, and Peter, James, and John took the 3 others closer and they fell asleep. John leaves out all of that. Now, maybe he leaves out the falling asleep part because he was one of them. That could be. John also leaves out the kiss of Judas. We'll get to that in a little bit. John also leaves out the part that we get from Luke where it says that an angel actually came down and prayed with him, strengthening him. So John leaves out a lot of other details that we get in the other Gospels. One other thing that I like to think about here, I read some this week and I really liked it. Jesus is going to the Garden of Gethsemane. Life, as we know it, began in the Garden of Eden. Eternal life begins in the Garden of Gethsemane, right here when Jesus goes to the cross. So, Jesus, he's going out with his disciples, went over the brook Kidron. He's now in the Garden of Gethsemane. Judas knows that he's going there often, so then we're in verse 3. Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. So Judas came there, and it says he came there with a detachment of troops. The New Living Translation, it translates it a contingent of troops. The NIV says a detachment of troops. The King James Version just says he came with a band of men. We don't know how many soldiers came to arrest Jesus with Judas. But this word, detachment of troops, it could likely mean a Roman cohort. And a cohort was 1/10 of a legion, and a legion was 6,000 or 7,000. So probably in the hundreds that came out to arrest Jesus. And we don't know exactly how many soldiers it was, but we know it is a lot because in the book of Matthew, it's chapter 26, verse 47, Matthew tells us that Judas came there with a great multitude of people. So just imagine if you think of a great multitude, you don't think of 4, 5, 6, or 10. You think of a lot of people. Now, it's also interesting here. The Jews had already tried to arrest Jesus. Remember, they sent out their own temple police. It was in John chapter 7, like, go arrest that man. And they come back. They're like, well, why didn't you arrest him? They said, well, no man ever spoke like this man. Notice that now the Jews aren't going to leave it up to their own people. They're getting the Romans involved now. So they now have the Romans involved. We don't know how many people are coming here, but we know it is a lot. So let's keep going here. Verse 4. Jesus, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, whom are you seeking? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Notice they said Jesus of Nazareth. There would have been many people named with the same name as Jesus back then. Jesus is just actually the Greek translation of Joshua. But in any language, the name Jesus means the Lord is salvation. So they had to make it specific who they were looking for. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, whom are you seeking? They said to him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to them, I am he. And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Now we need to look at this right here. When Jesus said to them, I am he, if you're reading a New King James Version, that he is going to be in italics. Why is that in italics? Because Jesus didn't say, I am he. The translators put it in there. Jesus actually just said, I am. Jesus said, we talk about the 7 I am statements in the book of John. I am the bread of life, the light of the world. I am the door. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the true vine. We talk about those 7 I am statements of Jesus in the book of John. Right here is another I am statement of Jesus right here. They said, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. What did Jesus say? Jesus said, I am. Jesus used the divine title. Do you remember clear back in Exodus chapter 3 when Moses sees the burning bush and has to take off his shoes? And Moses said, well, who should I say sent me? And what did God say? Tell him I am who I am. Tell him the I am sent you. What did Jesus just say to them? I am. The translators added the he. So, verse 5, they answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to them, I am he. And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Verse 6, now when he said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. With just his voice, think about this, with just his voice, Jesus knocked an entire army to the ground. This reminds me at the beginning of 2 Kings. Remember when Azariah was sending troops of 50 out to arrest Elijah? And Elijah just kept calling down fire from heaven on them. 50 would come out. Elijah burned them up, fire from heaven. Another 50 came out. Elijah burned them too. Finally, the third 50 came out, and they're begging for their life. And finally, Elijah's like, okay, I guess I'll go. This is what this reminds me of. With just his voice, Jesus knocks the whole army to the ground. But this also shows us something. This shows us that Jesus was in control the entire time. He wasn't taken by surprise. He wasn't, oh no, what do I do now? No, Jesus was in control the entire time. Jesus was not a victim. He was a volunteer. Because the Bible tells us that for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. At any one time, Jesus could have destroyed them all. Now, as we've said before, we don't know how many soldiers there were, but most likely in the hundreds. And could you imagine this sight, 100 soldiers just falling to the ground? The interesting thing, this is actually prophetic. It was prophesied before. I didn't know that before this week studying this. Psalm 27:2 says, when the wicked, even my enemies and my foes came upon me to eat my flesh, they stumbled and fell. This was prophetic what Jesus did right here. It also tells us in the it's in Second Thessalonians. It says that Christ will destroy the wicked with just his breath. He can do it. It's going to happen. So Jesus said to them, I am. All the soldiers fall to the ground. Verse 7. Then he, Jesus, asked them again, whom are you seeking? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Now, can I tell you, I read the soldiers' reply in verse 7 much, much differently than I do in verse 5. First they come out and said, Jesus said, whom are you seeking? They said, Jesus of Nazareth. Then they fall to the ground and Jesus says, whom are you seeking? I always read it this way with a timid voice, like, Jesus of Nazareth, what in the world just happened? We've never seen this before. That's the way I always read verse 7. I always read it with a much different response voice than I did in the other one. So verse 8, Jesus answered them, I have told you that I am he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled which he spoke, of those whom you've given me, I have lost none. Now, Jesus was, of course, saving his disciples. He's like, hey, if you're coming for me, let these guys go their way. They're innocent. Now, one interesting thing here, as I've said, John actually leaves out the kiss of Judas. But all the other three Gospels have it that Judas comes up and kisses him. Now, we would think that's weird. Like, why would you give another guy a kiss? But actually, back then, that was how they greeted each other, with a kiss. The Bible actually tells us numerous times. Paul and Peter both say it. Greet everyone with a holy kiss. Aren't you glad we don't do that anymore? We can't even get people to shake hands sometimes during greeting time. And Paul was saying, hey, greet everybody with a holy kiss. So, John leaves out Judas in the kiss. Let's get here. Verse 10. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Now, Peter, great fisherman, probably not a great swordman, right? We know that we are getting a firsthand account right here of everything that happened. Did the disciples always carry swords? We don't know that. But back in Luke, Jesus said, he who has no money, sell something and get some money. He who does not have a sword, gets some. And they said, hey, we have two swords right here. And Jesus says, well, that'll be enough. So we know that they carried at least two swords. We admire Peter's zeal and his courage here. But, when he told Jesus, I'm willing to die for you, we see that he was speaking the truth right here. Peter probably still remembers Jesus telling him, no, you're going to deny me. And he's ready to prove Jesus wrong right here. But we also got to remember that Peter is going against God's will. I'm not sure when it was. I think it was in Matthew chapter 16. Jesus tells his disciples, hey, I'm going up to Jerusalem. I'm going to be crucified, killed, and on the third day I'll rise. And Peter comes and says, no, Lord, this will not happen to you. We won't allow it. And you know what Jesus tells Peter? He says, get behind thee, Satan. So right here, Peter is actually going against the will of God. Verse 11. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? So all four gospel accounts have the ear getting cut off. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. All four gospel accounts have the ear getting cut off. Luke actually tells us that Jesus healed the man's ears and put it right back on. We only get that out of the Gospel of Luke. I've always wondered whatever happened to Malchus. Because John actually names him by name. This is not just some unnamed Roman soldier that, they don't just say, well, Peter cut off some guy's ear, Jesus put it back on. No, he actually points out that the servant's name was Malchus. I always wonder if Malchus actually became a follower of Jesus, just because John points him out by name. So, verse 11, Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? Drink the cup. This is another one of those sayings that we get out of the Bible, like the writing on the wall. That comes from the book of Daniel. I get by the skin of my teeth. We get that from the book of Job. Head in the clouds, root of the matter. They're all euphemisms that we get out of the Bible. But this drink the cup, that actually means to go through a trial. It's in Revelations. It's going to say that one's going to have to drink the cup of God's wrath and indignation. And this is where we actually get like the Stanley Cup. NASCAR used to be the Winston Cup. In golf, you have the Ryder Cup. It's a cup because they went through trials to win it. It was tough. It's not a cup because victors used to drink out of it. It's a cup because they went through the trials to get there. Jesus says, I have to drink this cup. And that's where we get this saying. All right, we're gonna quit right there where Jesus says, Peter, put your sword into its sheath. Now Jesus is about to go through 6 different trials before his crucifixion. And next week, we're going to start in verse 12, and we'll start getting into those 6 different trials that Jesus went through. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I hope you learned something. And I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Bye.